So one thing you'll notice in 7th grade is this upfront attention being made to proportional relationships. And overall, if you have looked at your 7th grade program, proportional relationships, now that does not mean just solving proportions, but proportional relationships should occupy, I guess we'll say, a lot of your 7th grade program. It's a major focus area. Other topical areas for subclaim A in 7th grade include operations with fractions, expressions, equations, and inequalities. And that's it. So you want to make sure that there's not a whole lot of different topical areas in 7th grade under subclaim A, because certainly the proportional relationships and the operation with the fractions has something to do with one another, hopefully, as well as then certainly this idea of, you know, when we're solving these expressions, equations, and inequality, I'm sure there's going to be some proportions involved as well. But a couple of things of note just from this snapshot. First of all, this is huge. You know, you really want to find the best resources to teach proportional relationships at a high level. Most importantly, you'll see that regardless of, look at this kind of second cluster right here, regardless of the level of performance of the child, they have to be able to compute unit rates. If you are not doing unit rates in your 7th grade program, you are not giving your students access to the curriculum, and they will not be able to perform with this. So that's the same regardless. Now, what's interesting then is there's a whole lot of similarity with the next set of suggestions as well, in terms of deciding whether two quantities are proportional, identifying the constant of proportionality, and so on and so forth. But what you see happens at the bottom, and when you look at the next page, when you have the actual document, is that then it gets to be a difference in what I'm doing with that proportional relationship. That, you know, if I'm a level 2 child, I'm really just doing your representations with solving simple, you know, real world problems, ratio and percent problems. And then when I get to levels 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to then start to use that kind of graphically, as well as then when you look at the end of this section, I'm actually then going to represent proportional relationships in different forms: tables, equations, graphs, verbally using words, understanding the limitations of a unit rate, when it's appropriate to use a unit rate. So what you can begin to do with your 7th grade program is to see if you're ever having those kind of learning experiences, because that's the kind of exhibition of knowledge the kids are going to have with respect to proportional relationships. So what I'm trying to demonstrate in this session is the kind of analysis you need to go through with this these performance level descriptors to really start to analyze your program and see if it is at the level of rigor that you want it to be, and it needs to be. So let's look at subclaim A for grade 8. In grade 8, we then kind of shift gears. You know, grade 7, the bulk of the responsibility in grade 7 with this proportional relationships is really discussing them in and of themselves. In grade 8, we take a major shift toward the algebraification, if that's a word. It is now. Towards turning this into more of an algebraic kind of relationship. And so in grade 8, you'll see a longer list, if you will, of topical areas for subclaim A. So not just expressions and equations and scientific notation, but then we return to proportional relationships and linear equations. So it's the use of those proportional relationships in the context of a linear situation, solving linear equations, simultaneous linear equations, functions, congruence and similarity, and Pythagorean theorem. What you see in 8th grade is a whole lot when you dig into the subclaim A, you see a whole lot of what used to be in high school Algebra 1. And so when kids leave 8th grade, if they're performing at the distinguished, or especially distinguished, but certainly at the strong command level, they will have already demonstrated understanding of much of Algebra 1. Now, if you're an 8th grade teacher who also teaches Algebra 1 for high school credit, that may cause you to say, I need to listen to her next webinar, which is the same kind of parallel presentation, but for the high school courses. Because certainly it says, okay, if I'm doing all this stuff from my old Algebra 1 in 8th grade, then what is going to be left for me to teach in Algebra 1? And more on that in the next session. But a couple of things of note as you look at this page in particular is that we're solving expressions and equations with square roots and cube roots, especially in levels 4 and 5. And what you see here, it's a little hard to read because of the screen resolution. But in level 3, I can still meet the standard and solve equations with perfect squares and perfect cubes with a positive solution. But in order to demonstrate real understanding of expressions and equations, and to be really solidly ready for high school algebra, I need to ramp that up to not just include cubes and squares, but also cube roots and square roots. And also then applying that within a real world context. So, and you're going to see that a lot in many of these subclaims, that one of the things that changes student performance from 2 to 3 to 4 is the use of that real world context and understanding what it means. And so one other thing to know in this table as well, under the scientific notation tab or row, is that you see in this level 2 and 3, I'm just using scientific notation to estimate very large quantities, level 2, very large and very small quantities, level 3. And then I get into the more relative comparison and determine how many times as large one number is in relation to the other in level 4. So I'm imparting this to you to have you think about we need to be sure that when we, for instance, teach about scientific notation, that we don't just have kids writing the numbers and looking at what the numbers are, but also comparing them with one another. And in addition, you see the use of technology with and without technology. Interestingly enough, at the level 5, the with technology comes into play. So that's something to think about the kinds of problems kids might be given if they're allowed to use technology and have to perform operations with those scientific notation numbers. So that's 8th grade subclaim A. Again, quite a long list of topical areas. That's major content, so that's going to be occupying a lot of your time as you're teaching, and a lot of the students' time, of course, as you're looking at assessing them for understanding.